Players are skeptical about purchasing remastered versions of games just because it feels like you're buying the same game twice, and that's completely reasonable. And in many ways, Scholar of the First Sin is no exception because it's so similar to the original game. So, in this regard, I think your decision about buying it is, fairly logical in that you just need to look at your original experience with the game. If you didn't even beat Dark Souls 2, or even if you played through it once and then put it down and never touched it again, then chances are Scholar of the First Sin isn't going to actually provide you with anything different. On the other hand, if you enjoyed Dark Souls 2 originally so much so as to play through multiple times and try different builds, and you really got like dozens and dozens of hours of enjoyment out of it, then undoubtedly you'll get a lot of enjoyment out of Scholar of the First Sin as well, just because they take the original game and they improve upon it with regards to the gameplay and the graphics as well. I mean, I think that much should be obvious. Like, we're playing on a new generation of consoles, so you've got 60 frames per second instead of 30, and a higher resolution as well. So this is going to be the best looking Souls game of all time for console players for sure, and I think that will be a selling point for some players. PC players have already enjoyed, the graphics and the higher frame rate and resolution since the launch a year ago. Of course, there's, I think, improvements to textures and lighting and some other graphical changes that I'm not so familiar with. I'm obviously not as concerned with the graphics, but you might be, so it's obviously worth mentioning here at the beginning. But a big focus of this video is going to be on the gameplay and ways that they've improved item placement, enemy placement, variety, and as well the Fragrant Branch of Yore system. So originally, Fragrant Branches were only used to access the Shaded Woods, and then you needed another Fragrant Branch to access a blacksmith and one other vendor. But it was really limited in this regard. Like, you only needed 3, really. There were a couple other places to use them, but it was fairly insignificant. This time around, in Scholar of the First Sin, they've really improved the Fragrant Branch system and made it a significant piece throughout the whole game. So you'll be coming across statues that block paths that were originally accessible. Fragrant branches are more common, but it forces you to make decisions with how you want to spend those fragrant branches as well. So they've really developed this system, and it definitely made for some surprises during that first playthrough. The more significant improvements, I think, are with enemy placement and item placement. After playing Scholar of the First Sin, it's my opinion that originally they almost rushed the placement of enemies and items. It seems like that was sort of decided at the end of the development cycle. Like, they, lay out this intricate world, and there's all these beautiful landscapes, and then at the very end they sort of scatter enemies and items throughout without putting as much thought into this placement as they would have wanted. This time with Scholar of the First Sin, they had all the time in the world. The game's already done pretty much. They just got to adjust where enemies and items are located. So they got to be very meticulous this time around and place these things exactly where they wanted. It made for a very exciting first playthrough where I can just, throw all my knowledge of enemy spawns out the window and once again get to enjoy surprises around every corner, it seems like. Surprises with where enemies are going to be, surprises with what types of enemies, because now there's a lot more variety in a lot of different zones. There's just enemies you never saw there before, so it's really refreshing. And the same thing goes with items, where you're used to treasure locations from the original game, and again, you can forget all that because there'll be a lot of surprises in store for you with this new playthrough. And for me, as someone who's played through the original Dark Souls 2 so many times, this just really brought a lot of enjoyment, made the first playthrough exciting once again, and even at a couple moments where I had to pick my jaw up off the floor because I just really wasn't expecting, a certain enemy to be in a certain area, and really just made for a very fun first playthrough. And I'm still getting through New Game Plus, and even on New Game Plus, the Red Phantoms that they've added have new locations as well, and there's new Red Phantoms strewn about the game that I'm still discovering even now. So I think that these improvements for variety and strategical enemy placement, it makes the game challenging again. It refreshes the experience, makes it more fun, and it seems like they really got to put as much time and thought into them, so that these very important pieces of an RPG are in place exactly where they should be. One complaint that is worth mentioning here, just because I see it posted a lot online, is the complaint with weapon degradation, or how quickly you lose durability on your weapons. If you're just R1 mashing and you kill an enemy and you keep pressing R1 so that you're attacking an already dead enemy as it falls to the ground, or your great club lands in a pile of dead spiders, your weapon degrades very, very quickly. So I guess you can look at it as a way to encourage players to only attack enemies until they're dead, at which point, stop pressing R1, just because you're going to lose durability so fast. And players who are new to the 60 frames per second environment are not used to this, because this issue didn't exist on 360 or PS3. It did, however, exist on PC, and that PC version's been out for almost a year, so it doesn't seem like something that's going to get patched out. I don't know if there's official word on it, if FromSoft thinks this is working as intended, but it's worth mentioning. Personally, I don't think it's a big deal. I've been playing on PC for a long time, so I'm kind of used to it. There are ways around it, right? Like, if you are primarily using one weapon, there are lots of bonfires in Dark Souls 2. Everyone knows you get full durability there. If you really need to invest a repair powder to keep on chugging forward in a zone, then you can do that. There's the bracing knuckle ring, which reduces weapon degradation, and maybe they're just encouraging players to carry multiple weapons that you can use. Like my first build in Scholar of the First Sin, I used the washing pole, which only has 20 durability. It's, I think, the lowest durability you can have on a weapon. And I really didn't have too many issues with it, except for maybe one or two zones like Seldora, for example, where there's a room with 15 or 20 spiders. It's going to be hard to mow them all down without breaking your weapon, just because they're going to die in one hit, and inevitably the blade of your weapon is going to be, inside of these dead monsters. And even if it's just in them for a few frames, it really degrades your weapon quite rapidly. But I've already mentioned a few ways to work around it. It's certainly not a game-breaking issue, but it's definitely one that a lot of players are complaining about, because it's a big change. If you're coming, as I mentioned before, from the older generation of consoles, going from 30 FPS to 60 FPS, your durability is going to run out much faster. So players just aren't used to it. It's a common complaint. It's definitely not game-breaking, but it was worth mentioning here. The only other thing I want to mention is soul memory, and I know soul memory is a buzzword for a lot of players out there who are frustrated with it as a matchmaking system. Of course, with Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, matchmaking was done based on your soul level, and it was a very simple system, and it could allow for competitive PvP. When Dark Souls 2 first came out, it was all about soul memory, and there was no way to control your soul memory. So inevitably, all players are headed towards that maximum soul level, maximum soul memory tier, and it set up a situation where players who wanted to stay at soul level 150 couldn't really compete in PvP because, soul level 500 plus players were going to be matched up with them. They did add the Agape Ring, and the Agape Ring's available on all versions of Dark Souls 2. When you wear this ring, it prevents you from accumulating additional souls. It can lock you into a certain soul memory bracket, which does allow for competitive PvP if you are aware of the soul memory tiers, if you get the Agape Ring, and if you don't waste any souls. For example, if you want to use the red sign soapstone to be summoned in someone else's world for a duel, then you can use that with the Agape Ring, and say at 1.8, 1.9 million souls, you place your sign down, someone summons you, you are guaranteed that they will have 2.5 million soul memory or less. And that means that the differential for soul levels is going to be very small. Like your soul level 155, they might be 160, 165, 145. It'll be very close, which is different for what players experienced previously. Some players wanted to stay at soul level 150, but their soul memory keeps going up and up. Eventually they're going to end up having their matches made with soul level 500, soul level 600, 838, because inevitably soul memory could only go up. When they added the Agape Ring, they allowed you to cap your soul memory, and in the example I used with the red sign soapstone, it allows for competitive PvP dueling experience where that approximately you're the same level as your opponent, just like it was in Dark Souls 1. Anyways, I think it's time to wrap up this review. Just to recap, if you enjoyed the original Dark Souls 2, undoubtedly you're going to enjoy Scholar of the First Sin. They've literally just taken everything good about Dark Souls 2 and improved upon it. Not just the graphics, but especially the enemy placement, from a strategic standpoint, enemy variety, to new treasure locations, new surprises, and just a fresh PvE experience and a really enjoyable first playthrough. I'm looking forward to getting through the rest of New Game Plus and playing this game even more. It's really the only Souls-like game I've been enjoying for the past week and a half since it came out on PC, and any Dark Souls 2 fan would definitely get a lot of enjoyment out of this